bowling alleys, pizza shops, malls, roller skating rinks, boardwalks. In the 80s and 90s, you couldn't go anywhere without finding an arcade machine. They were big, bright, flashy, and loud. And they ate quarters faster than a hungry hippo ate marbles. So, let's backpedal a bit and revisit the awesome arcade days of the 80s and 90s.
Jerry, video games are the latest craze to sweep the country and most of the world, too.
In the 80s, arcade games were all the rage. It was a time when home consoles couldn't come close to the big, flashy, loud excitement of an arcade game. In 1982 alone, the arcade video game industry made $8 billion in quarter revenue, surpassing both pop music and Hollywood films combined. And growing up in the 80s, it was nothing short of glorious insanity. There was nothing more exciting than making a trip to the local mall and getting to go wander around the arcade. 80s arcades were like mysterious dens. The air reeked of cigarettes and damp rugs. Rock music blared out in all directions, keeping a kid like myself confused and a bit scared of my surroundings. Back then, the arcade would be packed with kids, teenagers, and young adults standing around. Most were eagerly watching and waiting for a chance to get on their favorite game. The longest lines were usually at Pac-Man, Frogger, Centipede, Asteroids, Donkey Kong, Cuber, Galaga, Space Invaders, Dig Dug, Defender, Miss Pac-Man, Pole Position, Tempest, Spy Hunter, Afterburner, Paperboy, Outrun, Burger Time, Contra, Arachnoid, Rygar, 720, Rastan, Mortal Kombat, Joust. Then there were the multiplayer games like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, The Simpsons, WrestleFest, Gauntlet, Rampage, X-Men. Then there were the shooting arcades like T2, House of the Dead, Operation Wolf, Alien. Let me know if I missed anything. There was no shortage of games to play, but everyone had their personal favorites. Bring lots of quarters because they go fast. But if you have dollar bills, you're in luck. There's always a handy coin machine waiting for you in some far-off corner. Just make sure you have a fresh, crisp dollar. Or you can always hit up the employee with the nifty quarter dispenser strapped to his waist. There was a certain unspoken etiquette to an arcade as well. Rules you usually learned by doing something wrong. For instance, you could just stand and wait for someone to finish, but you could also place your quarters on the marquee area of the arcade to let others know you have next game. Though I was always afraid to leave my precious quarters on the machine. Most of the older guys in arcades were scary. They smoked and sometimes cursed at one another. So I'd usually seek out the lesser played games until something I wanted to play was available. Games like Wizard of War, Chiller, which I should never have played as a kid, Robotron, Blueprint, Mr. Do, Crystal Castles with the trackball? The trackball was super underrated. Should be part of the controllers nowadays, I'm just saying. And if you got real good at the games, or dumped enough quarters into them, you might just be immortalized by having your initials listed on the game itself. Most times just to come back the next day to see you've been bumped off by some guy named Ass. Arcades became such a part of the culture they started popping up in movies, like War Games, Goonies, Back to the Future 2. In The Last Starfighter, an arcade game became a main theme of the entire movie. Then, at the height of it all, came Chuck E. Cheese's.
Chuck E. Cheese's, you can win your way.
It changed the arcade from a dark, dank den to a place to eat bad pizza and be traumatized by animatronic nightmare fuel while you played arcade games. And it was the first place I ever saw this. Dragon's Lair. When Dragon's Lair popped onto the scene in 1983, it blew most kids away with what looked like a cartoon you could play. It looked amazing and sounded amazing, but it wasn't really a game at all. And it also cost double to sometimes triple to play. Most games at the time were a quarter, but you dump 2 into this machine and die instantly. It was frustrating, and it was the first time I realized that some of these games were made just to take your money. Eventually, consoles and PCs started catching up to the graphics of the arcade games. Why drive out to Chuck E. Cheese's or your local mall to dump quarters into some game when you could sit at home and play for hours without being bothered by some kid with a full fist of quarters breathing down your back? And by the late 90s, most arcades were gone, and the only remnants were old Miss Pac-Man stuck in a corner of a pizza place or some roller rink or a movie theater. Sometimes a hotel will have a game room, a distant reminder of days gone by, a time that will most likely never come back, and a time that some of us still remember. So thanks for backpedaling with me. If you have any suggestions for topics I should cover, I'm all ears. Thanks again for backpedaling with me. This is Tig, and I'll see you in the future.